My own daughter stole my dog while I was still alive, and somehow managed to make it sound like she was doing me a favor. Let me say that again slowly, because even now it feels unreal. My daughter. The little girl I once held against my chest during thunderstorms. The child whose fevers I stayed up all night nursing. The teenager whose tears I wiped after her first heartbreak. That same daughter stood in my living room last spring, clipped a leash onto my dog's collar, and walked him out of my house as if I had already been buried. His name was Charlie. He wasn't just a dog. He was the quiet heartbeat of this house after my husband died. He was the weight at the foot of my bed when the nights got too long. He was the reason I still had structure in my mornings. 7 a.m. walks, 7:30 breakfast, 8 a.m. sunlight on the porch. When my husband, Robert, passed away 3 years ago, people brought casseroles. They brought sympathy cards. They brought hollow promises like, "Call if you need anything." But when the house emptied out and the world stopped checking in, it was Charlie who stayed. He would rest his head on my lap when the silence felt suffocating. He would follow me from room to room, as if making sure I didn't disappear too. He learned the rhythm of my grief better than any human ever could. And my daughter decided I wasn't capable of loving him anymore. It started subtly. Melissa began commenting on things. "Mom, you look tired." "Mom, are you sure you can manage him?" "Mom, what if he makes you fall?" Every sentence wrapped in concern. Every word dipped in sugar. But underneath it? Doubt. I'm 76 years old, not senile. I still drive. I still cook. I still balance my own checkbook. I volunteer at church twice a week. I have arthritis, yes, but I have lived through childbirth, chemotherapy with my husband, and burying the love of my life. I can handle a 12-pound Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. But Melissa didn't see it that way. Or maybe she didn't want to. The day they came for him wasn't dramatic. That's the part that hurts most. There was no screaming. No explosión. Just calm, calculated decision-making. Melissa and her husband, Daniel, showed up mid-afternoon. No call ahead. That alone should have told me something wasn't right. Charlie barked once, then wagged his tail when he saw her. He always loved Melissa. He didn't know she had already decided his future without me. "We need to talk," she said as soon as she stepped inside. That phrase. It's never followed by anything good. Daniel stood near the doorway, arms crossed, scanning my house like he was assessing risk. Melissa sat down across from me and folded her hands. "Mom," she began gently, "we found a wonderful family for Charlie." The words didn't land at first. Found a family. For Charlie. As if he was a misplaced object. As if he wasn't already home. "I'm sorry," I said. "They have a yard," she continued quickly. "2 little girls. They've been looking for a dog just like him. They run every day. They can give him more attention." More attention. I looked down at Charlie curled beside my feet. I brush him every night. I cook his chicken plain because it's easier on his stomach. I sit on the porch and talk to him like he understands every word. And maybe he does. "What are you saying?" I asked quietly. Daniel answered this time. "It's about safety." That word again. Safety is what people say when they want control without sounding cruel. "You tripped last month," Melissa said. "If he gets under your feet and you fall, you could break a hip. Then what? Then what? Then I would heal. Like I always have." But what they really meant was this. "You're getting old. You're becoming fragile. We're starting to make decisions for you." Charlie stood and placed his paws on my knees. He looked up at me with those wide brown eyes, completely unaware that his life was being negotiated over my head. "I'm not giving him away," I said. Melissa's face tightened. "It's already arranged." Already arranged. The decision had been made before they walked through my door. I felt something inside my chest shift. Not a sharp pain, not a cry, but a cold realization. They didn't come to ask. They came to take. And when Melissa reached for his leash later that evening, telling me, "It's for the best," I realized something much deeper than betrayal was happening. My daughter didn't just believe I couldn't handle a dog. She believed I couldn't handle my own life anymore. And as I stood on that porch watching Charlie's little face pressed against the back window of a stranger's SUV, I wasn't crying. I was changing. Because they thought they were protecting me. They had no idea they had just awakened something far more dangerous than grief. And what I did next, they never saw coming. The first night without Charlie was the longest night of my life. And I've buried a husband. You don't realize how loud a small dog makes your home until he's gone. The click of nails on hardwood. The soft sigh when he curls into his bed. The little shake of his collar tag in the middle of the night. That night, there was nothing. No movement. No breathing except my own. I lay on the right side of my bed, my side, and stared at the empty space where Charlie's little dog bed used to sit. I hadn't moved it. I couldn't. It still held the shape of him. People think losing a pet is minor, temporary, replaceable. But when you're old and widowed, a dog isn't a pet. He's structure. He's witness. He's proof you're still needed. The next morning I woke up at 6:45 out of habit. My body still expected him to jump onto the mattress and lick my hand. Instead, my hand reached into empty air. I sat up slowly, the silence pressing against my ears. The house felt bigger, colder. I made coffee for one. I poured his water bowl out, because it still had water in it from yesterday. My hands trembled when I washed it. They didn't even let me say goodbye properly. Melissa had said, "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. Like grief is something you can negotiate. By day 3, the quiet had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy. I found myself walking past the leash hook by the door and pausing every single time. I still avoided stepping near where his food mat used to be. Muscle memory is cruel that way. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the feeling. The feeling that my daughter had decided I was no longer competent enough to choose my own companionship. That I was becoming managed. And then I saw something that shifted everything. It was Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in my armchair when my phone buzzed. A social media notification. I barely use those apps, but sometimes I scroll just to feel less invisible. Melissa had posted pictures. I stared at the screen. There she was. Smiling. Perfect makeup. Perfect lighting. And beside her? 2 dogs. Not just any dogs. Purebred French bulldogs. Cream-colored. Blue eyes. Designer collars. One wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. The caption read, "Sunday snuggles with our baby's dog face red heart #blessed. Our babies." I felt something inside me go still. Very, very still. They had 2 high-maintenance, expensive, flat-faced designer dogs that required special diets and vet visits. But my 12-pound, calm, senior cavalier was suddenly too much liability for me. I zoomed in on the photo. Melissa was holding one of them like a child. Craig, "Oh excuse me Daniel," was crouched beside the other grinning. They weren't worried about tripping hazards. They weren't worried about liability. They were worried about control. And I finally understood something. Charlie wasn't taken because I couldn't handle him. He was taken because they wanted to prove I couldn't handle anything. My independence. My house. My finances. It starts small. You shouldn't drive at night. Let us manage your accounts. Maybe you should think about assisted living. And now, you can't keep your dog. I put my phone down slowly. And for the first time since Charlie left, I wasn't drowning in sadness. I was thinking. Carefully. Because if they believed I was slipping, if they believed I was fragile, then they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. That evening, I did something simple. I called Melissa. She answered on the 3rd ring. Mom. Her voice was bright. Too bright. "I saw your post," I said calmly. "Oh," she laughed lightly. "Aren't they adorable? Craig surprised me last month." Last month. They had bought 2 designer dogs last month, while planning to remove mine. "Beautiful," I replied. There was a pause. "Mom, you're not still upset about Charlie, are you?" "Upset?" I looked around my quiet house. "No," I said gently. I wasn't upset anymore. I was awake. "Well," she continued, relieved, "you'll see. It was for the best." "For the best." "Yes," I repeated softly. "For the best." After we hung up, I sat very still. Then I reached for my old leather notebook, the one I used to keep household records in. I opened to a blank page. And I wrote 3 words. Find Charlie back. Because here's what my daughter didn't know about me. I may be 76, but I am not helpless. And if they thought taking my dog would make me smaller, they had no idea what happens when you corner a woman who has already survived everything. What I discovered about where Charlie actually went. That's when the real story begins. And trust me, they're not ready for what I'm about to do. The next morning, I did something my daughter never imagined I would do. I started asking questions. Not loudly, not emotionally, just calmly, methodically. The way I used to handle PDA budgets and insurance forms when the school tried to shortchange teachers. People mistake age for softness. They forget that women who have run households for 40 years know how to investigate quietly. I began with the simplest place, the local neighborhood Facebook groups. I don't use social media much, but I understand how people talk when they think they're helping. I search recent posts about small breed adoptions. Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Male. Senior. Rehoming. And there it was. 3 weeks ago. A post from a woman named Kathy L. The caption read, "Looking for loving home for sweet senior Cavalier. Owner unable to continue care. Small rehoming fee to ensure serious inquiries." Small rehoming fee. My stomach tightened. The pictures were of Charlie. My Charlie. Same white blaze on his chest. Same tiny scar on his back paw from when he stepped on a pinecone 2 summers ago. Owner unable to continue care. I stared at that sentence until it blurred. Melissa hadn't told people he was loved. She hadn't told them he was healthy. She hadn't told them I walked him every morning and brushed his ears every night. She told them I was incapable. I clicked on the profile. Kathy L. Wasn't some random stranger. She was Craig's cousin. My hands went very still on the keyboard. This wasn't some emotional rescue mission for a better home. This was planned, coordinated, arranged inside their circle. And then I saw the comments. How much is the fee? Is he AKC registered? Is he good with kids? Kathy replied, yes, registered. $1,200 rehoming fee. $1,200. They didn't give my dog away. They sold him. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The house was quiet, but something inside me was no longer heavy with grief. It was sharpening. Melissa had looked me in the eye and said it was about safety. Craig had spoken about liability. They framed it like compassion. And all along, they were pocketing money. $1,200 for the dog that slept beside me while I cried over my husband's hospital bills. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I printed the post. Every comment. Every timestamp. I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside my leather notebook. Then I did something even calmer. I messaged Kathy. Hello, I wrote. I believe I may know the original owner of this sweet dog. May I ask where he is now? I'd love to check on him. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I simply asked. She responded 2 hours later. He's with a family in Brookfield. They paid the fee and signed an agreement. He's adjusting well. Paid the fee. Signed an agreement. My daughter had legally transferred my dog without my consent. I felt heat rise in my chest, but it wasn't the frantic kind. It was controlled. Focused. I replied again, politely. Would you mind sharing the family's contact information? I have medical records and personal items that belong to him. She hesitated. I'd have to ask them first. Of course she would. Because now there was risk. And people get nervous when risk appears. That evening I called Melissa. She answered with that same careful brightness. Mom. I found the post, I said calmly. Silence. I could hear her breathing shift on the other end. What post? The one Craig's cousin made. The one selling my dog for $1,200. The silence stretched longer this time. Then she said something that told me exactly who she had become. It wasn't selling. It was a rehoming fee. A rehoming fee. That money, I asked quietly, where did it go? It covered expenses. What expenses? She didn't answer directly. We thought you might need help soon, Mom. That money could be useful. Useful. They had sold my dog in preparation for managing my finances. This was never about Charlie. This was about control. I ended the call without raising my voice, without crying, without begging, because something had shifted permanently inside me. They had underestimated two things. First, how much I loved that dog. Second, how clearly I could see when someone tried to outmaneuver me. The next morning, Kathy messaged back. The family agreed to speak with you. Here's their number. I stared at the contact information. Brookfield was 22 minutes away. Close enough to drive. Close enough to see with my own eyes. Close enough to take back what was mine. Because here's what Melissa didn't understand. I wasn't done grieving. I was done being managed. And if they thought selling my dog was the end of the story, they had just started something they will regret for the rest of their lives. What I found when I drove to that house in Brookfield. That's when everything changed. And that's when my revenge truly began. The drive to Brookfield felt longer than 22 minutes. I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel. The way you do when you're holding yourself together by discipline alone. The sky was pale gray that morning, low clouds pressing down on the road like even the weather understood something heavy was unfolding. I rehearsed nothing. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't practice tears. I was going there to see my dog. The address Kathy sent me led to a tidy suburban street. Freshly cut lawns. Identical mailboxes. Children's bikes lying sideways near driveways. The kind of place people post holiday photos from. I parked across the street first. I needed a moment. My chest felt tight, but not weak. It felt coiled. Focused. Then I saw him. Through the living room window. Charlie. He was sitting on a beige rug near a glass coffee table. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe the house looked bigger. He wasn't playing. He wasn't wagging. He was just sitting there, staring at the door. Waiting. Something inside me cracked open. And then immediately sealed itself back up. I got out of the car. Each step to the front door felt deliberate. Measured. I rang the bell. A woman in her late 30s opened the door. Friendly face. Soft sweater. The kind of woman who probably believed she had done something kind. Yes, she said. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I replied evenly. I'm Charlie's owner. Her smile faltered. Oh. She stepped aside and called out. Mark? She's here. Charlie heard my voice. I didn't even say his name. He just knew. He sprang up so fast his nails clicked against the hardwood. He ran toward the door and began whining. Not barking, whining. That desperate, confused, relieved sound that only comes from a dog who recognizes home. I dropped to my knees. Charlie, I whispered. He pressed his entire body against me. Tail thrashing, paws scrambling to climb into my lap like he was afraid I might disappear again. I buried my face in his fur and inhaled. He still smelled like my lavender detergent beneath whatever new scent they'd bathed him in. Behind me, the couple stood awkwardly. We were told, the husband began carefully, that you were moving into assisted living. Assisted living? I looked up slowly. Excuse me. The wife shifted uncomfortably. The woman who arranged the adoption said you were unable to care for him. That it was unsafe. That you didn't want him anymore. Didn't want him anymore. The words felt like acid. I stood up, holding Charlie against my chest. He clung to me like Velcro. I have never, I said calmly, in my entire life abandoned anything I loved. The couple exchanged glances. We paid a significant fee, the husband added, almost defensively. We thought we were helping. I know you did, I replied. And I know you believed you were. That's when I noticed something else. Charlie's nails were overgrown. His ears weren't brushed properly. He had lost weight. Not abused, but unsettled. Displaced. He kept looking up at me as if asking why I had let this happen. And that was the moment something shifted permanently. This wasn't about reclaiming a dog anymore. This was about correcting a lie. I turned back to the couple. I will reimburse every dollar you paid, I said firmly. Today. In cash. They hesitated. We've grown attached, the wife said quietly. I nodded. I understand. But he has not. Charlie's paws tightened in my sweater, as if proving my point. There was a long silence. Finally, the husband exhaled. If what you're saying is true, then this wasn't right. It wasn't, I said. An hour later, Charlie was back in my car, back in my passenger seat, curled into the blanket I had brought from home. He didn't whine. He didn't fidget. He slept. Like he finally felt safe. I drove home without music. Without tears. Just clarity. Because here's what Melissa and Craig never imagined. They lied about my mental state. They told strangers I was incapable. They sold my dog under false pretenses. And they pocketed money in the process. That isn't just betrayal. That's fraud. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't rush inside. I sat in the car and looked at my house. The porch swing. The curtains in the window. The life I had built. They thought they were preparing to manage my decline. Instead, they had just handed me evidence. And I have never been more clear-headed in my life. Charlie followed me inside, and immediately went to his old bed. He circled once. Twice. Then laid down with a deep sigh. Home. I walked to my desk, opened my leather notebook, and wrote 5 new words beneath the others. They lied. Now they learn. Because getting my dog back was only step 1. What I planned to do next. That would make sure they never underestimated me again. And this time, I wasn't going to be quiet about it. Revenge, when you're young, looks loud. When you're my age, it looks like documentation. The morning after I brought Charlie home, I didn't call Melissa. I didn't post anything online. I didn't confront Craig. I made an appointment with an attorney. His name is Richard Halpern. I've known him for nearly 20 years. He helped my husband update our estate plan when the cancer diagnosis came. He is the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, it's measured. I brought everything. Printed screenshots of the post. The $1,200 rehoming fee. The messages from Kathy. The text from Melissa saying it was for my safety. The statement from the Brookfield couple confirming they were told I was mentally unable to care for my dog. Richard read silently for a long time. Then he looked at me over his glasses. Eleanor, he said carefully. Did you give your daughter legal power of attorney? No. Did you sign any document transferring ownership of the dog? No. Did you authorize anyone to represent your medical or mental capacity? Absolutely not. He leaned back. What they did, he said slowly, is misrepresentation. Possibly fraud. And if they profited from it, that complicates things further. I felt no shock. Only confirmation. They told people I was mentally declining. I said calmly. That I couldn't care for myself. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. That kind of statement can have serious legal implications. Good. Because here's what Melissa never understood about me. I raised her to be strong. She forgot I still am. I didn't want money. I didn't want drama. I wanted something far more valuable. A lesson. Richard drafted a formal letter that afternoon. It was precise. Clinical. Ruthless in its politeness. It stated that unauthorized sale of personal property had occurred. That false claims regarding my cognitive ability had been made publicly. That damages, both financial and reputational, were under review. It also requested full accounting of where the $1,200 had gone. And then, at my request, he added something else. A notice that I would be revising my estate plan effective immediately. When I walked out of his office, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady. That evening, the letter was delivered via certified mail. The next morning at 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. Melissa. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, she said, breath tight. What is this? What is what? I asked gently. This letter from your lawyer. Oh, I replied calmly. That. Silence pulsed on the line. You're suing us? She demanded. I'm protecting myself, I corrected. Craig's voice came faintly through the background. Put it on speaker. Melissa did. Eleanor, Craig began, using my first name like we were equals in a negotiation. This is unnecessary. We were trying to help. By telling strangers I was mentally unfit? I asked evenly. That's not what we said. It's documented, I replied. There was a pause. Then Melissa's voice cracked slightly. Mom, why are you doing this? Why? That word almost made me laugh. Because they thought I was acting emotionally. This wasn't emotion. This was correction. You sold my dog, I said. You lied about my mental state. And you pocketed money while positioning yourselves to manage my affairs. We were thinking long-term. Craig snapped. So am I said softly. The line went quiet. Are you really changing your will? Melissa asked. There it was. Not concern for the lawsuit. Concern for the inheritance. I am reviewing all of my decisions, I replied. That wasn't a lie. After we hung up, I looked down at Charlie, sleeping peacefully beside my chair. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about reminding them. You do not erase a woman while she's still alive. But here's the part they didn't know yet. The lawsuit was only one layer. Because while they were panicking about paperwork, I had already noticed something else. Something about those 2 designer French bulldogs they loved posting online. Something that could unravel their perfect image very quickly. And karma, when delivered properly, doesn't knock loudly. It removes what you love most. Quietly. And they were about to learn exactly how that feels. Revenge doesn't always require dirty hands. Sometimes all it requires is light. A week after the lawyer's letter was delivered, Melissa stopped posting. No more Sunday snuggles. No more filtered photos of her French bulldogs in matching sweaters. Silence on her page. That told me something was already cracking. But I wasn't finished. While reviewing paperwork with Richard, something small but interesting came up during casual conversation. He asked where Melissa and Craig were living now. I told him about the new gated subdivision they moved into last year, manicured lawns, strict HOA rules, the kind of place where mailbox paint shades are regulated. Richard raised an eyebrow. Isn't that development restricted to 1 pet per household under 30 pounds? He asked. I paused. I wouldn't know. But I did know something else. Melissa complains. About everything. 2 Christmases ago, she went on a 10-minute rant about a neighbor who painted their shutters off-approved beige. She once said, and I quote, "These rules protect property value." Protect property value. Interesting how rules only matter when they benefit you. That evening, I pulled up the HOA guidelines for their subdivision. Public record. Easy to access. And there it was in black and white. 1 domesticated pet per residence. Breed restrictions apply. Short-nosed breeds requiring special medical accommodations must be pre-approved due to insurance liability. 2 French bulldogs. Flat-faced. High risk. Insurance sensitive. I leaned back slowly in my chair. I didn't smile. I don't enjoy causing harm. But I do believe in balance. Melissa and Craig had told strangers I was a liability. They had used the word unsafe like a weapon. And here they were, in violation of the very rules they once praised. I didn't make an anonymous complaint that night. I waited. Because timing matters. 3 days later, Melissa called me again. This time her voice was strained. Mom, are you seriously going through with this legal thing? Yes, I said evenly. This is humiliating. Humiliating. That word struck something in me. You know what was humiliating? I replied quietly. Standing in a stranger's living room while they explained that you told them I was mentally incapable. Silence. Then she said something that revealed more than she intended. We were trying to secure things before they got complicated. Secure things. As if I were already fading. That night, after we hung up, I made the call. Not angry. Not dramatic. Calm. I contacted the HOA management office directly, identified myself, and simply asked a question. I was reviewing community guidelines, I said politely. Can you clarify the pet policy enforcement procedures? The woman on the phone was more than happy to explain. Apparently, violations had been increasing recently. They relied heavily on resident reports. Resident reports. I asked because my daughter lives there. I continued smoothly. And I would hate for her to unknowingly violate a policy that could impact her homeowner's insurance. There was a pause. Then the woman asked for the address. I gave it. I did not accuse. I did not exaggerate. I simply allowed the truth to exist where it needed to. 2 weeks later, Melissa showed up at my front door. Unannounced. Her eyes were red. You reported us, she said immediately. I asked for clarification. I corrected. They're threatening fines. They're saying we have to rehome one of them or face penalties. Rehome. The irony did not escape me. Craig stood behind her, jaw tight. This is petty, he said. No. Irraplia calmly. Petty is selling your mother's dog and calling it compassion. Melissa's voice broke. They could make us remove one of them. I looked at her carefully. They said the same thing about Charlie. For the first time since this began, I saw something new in her expression. Understanding. Not full remorse, but recognition. You wouldn't, she whispered. I held her gaze steadily. I didn't take your dogs, I said. I didn't lie about you. I didn't profit from you. I simply allowed rules to apply equally. Craig stepped forward, anger rising. You're trying to hurt us. No, I said softly. I'm showing you what it feels like. The silence between us was thick, heavy, because here's the truth. I never intended for their dogs to suffer. I intended for them to experience vulnerability, uncertainty, that sick feeling in your stomach when something you love might be taken from you. Karma doesn't scream. It mirrors. And now, for the first time, Melissa looked afraid. Not of losing money. Not of legal letters. But of losing something she cared about. And as she stood there on my porch, I realized something else. This wasn't over. Because Craig was not the kind of man who accepts consequences quietly. And if he chose to escalate, he was about to discover I have survived far worse than him. Craig came back 2 days later without Melissa. That told me everything. When a man who usually hides behind polite smiles shows up alone, it means control is slipping. I opened the door, and there he stood, jaw tight, shoulders squared, the kind of posture men use when they think physical presence equals authority. Can we talk? He asked. You're already here, I replied. He stepped inside but didn't sit. He paced once through my living room like he was evaluating square footage. I remained in my armchair. Charlie rested at my feet, calm but alert. Craig stopped and faced me. You've made your point. My point. I asked mildly. You filed legal action. You reported the HOA issue. You've embarrassed us. Embarrassed. The word almost felt poetic. You embarrassed yourselves, I said evenly. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences. His nostrils flared slightly. You're going to tear this family apart over a dog? There it was again. Over a dog. It was never about the dog, I replied quietly. It was about you deciding I was no longer capable of owning my own life. Craig ran a hand through his hair. You're 76. You live alone. You tripped. You forget things sometimes. I forget where I put my glasses, I said calmly. I do not forget who I am. He exhaled sharply. We were trying to plan ahead. Do you know how expensive elder care is? Do you know what happens when something goes wrong and no one's prepared? So you prepared, I said, by selling my dog and positioning yourselves over my assets. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. There was a long silence. Charlie shifted slightly, pressing against my slipper. Craig's voice lowered. You changed your will. It wasn't a question. Yes. To what? That's not your concern. His composure cracked then. You're punishing Melissa. I looked at him carefully. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. You're being manipulated by that lawyer. I almost smiled. Richard has known me longer than you have, I replied. He doesn't manipulate. He documents. Craig's face hardened. You think you're proving something? I already proved it, I said softly. I got my dog back. That hit him. Because they never thought I would. They thought I would cry. They thought I would accept it. They thought I would shrink. Instead, I investigated. I acted. I corrected. You're making Melissa feel like a monster, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Did she feel like a monster when she told strangers I was mentally unfit? He had no answer for that. And that's when Melissa appeared in my doorway. She must have been sitting in the car. Her eyes were swollen, face pale. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Stop, she said quietly. Craig turned. Melissa. Stop, she repeated. She walked into the living room and looked at me. Not defensively. Not arrogantly. Just shaken. Mom, she said, and her voice trembled. Did you really think we were trying to take over your life? I held her gaze. Yes. The word hung heavy between us. Her eyes filled. We were scared, she whispered. After you fell, after Dad died, you seemed different. Quieter. Smaller. Grief is not incompetence, I said gently. She swallowed hard. I didn't know how to help you. So you removed the one thing that kept me steady? I asked. Tears slipped down her face. Craig looked between us, frustrated, but silent now. Melissa stepped closer. When we talked about long-term planning, it wasn't greed. Then why keep the $1,200? I asked calmly. Her face went blank. Craig answered instead. We were going to put it toward a safety fund for you. You never mentioned that, I said. Because you would have overreacted. Overreacted. The arrogance in that word settled everything for me. You see, I said quietly, looking at Melissa, that's the problem. You decided my reaction didn't matter. My consent didn't matter. She covered her mouth. I thought I was protecting you. And I thought I was raising you better, I replied. The room went silent. Not angry, just honest. Charlie let out a small sigh at my feet. Melissa wiped her tears. Are you cutting me out? She asked softly. From everything. There it was. The real fear. Inheritance. Security. Future. I looked at her for a long time before answering. I rewrote my will, I said steadily. Not to punish you, but to make something clear. Craig stiffened. What clear? He demanded. That my life, I said calmly, is not a transition plan. Melissa began crying harder. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger. Not revenge. Power. Because they finally saw it. I was not fading. I was watching. And if they thought this confrontation was the end, they were wrong. Because what I had written into that new will, that's what truly changed everything. And they weren't ready to hear it. Melissa was still standing in my living room when I finally told her what I had done. Her hands were shaking. Craig stood stiff beside her, jaw clenched, like he was bracing for impact. I didn't rush my words. I wanted them to hear every syllable clearly. I did not cut you out of my will, I said evenly. Melissa let out a small, shaky breath, like she had been holding it for minutes. Craig, however, didn't relax. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I restructured it. I continued. Restructured how? He asked cautiously. I folded my hands in my lap. Charlie lay peacefully at my feet, as if he understood that balance had been restored. My home, I said calmly, will no longer transfer automatically to you. Melissa blinked. What does that mean? It means, I replied, that the house will be placed in a living trust. You will not gain access to it unless specific conditions are met. Craig's eyes narrowed. What conditions? An independent medical evaluation of my cognitive health every year. I said clearly. Conducted by a professional of my choosing, not yours. If at any point I am deemed competent, my assets remain under my control. If I am not, a neutral third-party executor takes over. Not family. The silence that followed was heavy. Melissa swallowed. You don't trust us. I looked at her gently. You tried to manage my life without my consent. Her eyes filled again. That was fear, Mom. No. Y correcta sufli. Fear asks questions. Control makes decisions. Craig shifted his weight. So you're punishing us by giving strangers authority? I am protecting myself from assumptions, I said calmly. Then I added the part that changed everything. And there is one more condition. Melissa looked up. What? If at any time you or Craig attempt to misrepresent my mental state again, or take legal action to force guardianship without verified cause, you forfeit your inheritance entirely. Everything goes to the Animal Rescue Foundation in Brookfield. Craig's composure cracked. That's extreme. No. Irreplicably. Selling my dog and telling people I was unfit was extreme. Melissa looked stunned. You would give everything away? If necessary, I said. Yes. And I meant it. Because here's what they finally understood in that moment. My wealth was not their security blanket. My life was not their contingency plan. And my independence was not negotiable. Melissa sank into the couch. I didn't think you'd fight back like this. That sentence hit harder than she realized. You didn't think I'd fight back at all, I said quietly. Craig opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time since this started, he had nothing strategic to say. Melissa looked at Charlie, then back at me. We were wrong, she whispered. The words were small, but they were real. And that mattered. I leaned forward slightly. You were not wrong to worry about me, I said gently. You were wrong to erase me. Tears slid down her face. I didn't know how to handle losing Dad, she admitted. You were so strong through everything, and then you got quiet. I thought you were slipping. Grief makes people uncomfortable. They mistake silence for weakness. I was grieving, I said softly. Not disappearing. Craig finally spoke again, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. What do you want from us? That was the right question. I want respect, I said. I want transparency. And I want you to understand something very clearly. They both waited. I am not your future project. I am your present mother. The room felt different then. Not combative. Not tense. Just exposed. Melissa nodded slowly. I don't want to lose you over this. You almost did, I replied honestly. And then I added the final piece. The lawsuit will proceed, I said calmly. But not for money. It will formally document that I was never declared incompetent. That matters. For my record. For my name. Craig looked startled. You're still going through with it? Yes. Even after this conversation? Yes, I repeated. Because accountability isn't revenge. It's clarity. They both absorbed that quietly. Charlie stood, stretched, and walked toward Melissa. He sniffed her hand cautiously. She knelt and touched him, crying softly. I'm sorry, she whispered to him. And maybe she meant it. But here's the truth. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It reshapes them. As they left my house that evening, something felt settled. Not perfectly healed, but balanced. They walked slower than they had when they arrived. And for the first time since this began, I felt something stronger than anger. Peace. Because I had proven something. Not just to them, but to myself. I was not fading. I was evolving. But what neither of them knew yet was that karma doesn't end with paperwork or HOA letters. Sometimes karma is simply this. You learn the hard way that the person you tried to control was the strongest one in the room all along. And the next choice they made would determine whether this family healed or fractured permanently. 3 days after that conversation, Melissa came back alone. No Craig. No dijerst pasture. No defensibtoon. Just my daughter. I opened the door, and I could tell immediately something inside her had broken open. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just quietly. Can I come in? She asked. You don't have to ask, I said. She stepped inside and looked around the house like she hadn't really seen it in years. The photos on the wall. The old oak cabinet her father built. The chair by the window where I read every evening. Charlie trotted over cautiously. She knelt down and buried her face in his fur. I can't stop thinking about what you said, she whispered. I sat across from her and waited. When someone is finally ready to tell the truth, you don't interrupt it. I wasn't trying to take over your life, she began. At least, I don't think I was. There was hesitation in her voice. That fragile kind of honesty that only shows up when pride is exhausted. Then what were you doing? I asked gently. She sat back on her heels and wiped her eyes. I was scared, she said. After Dad died, you handled everything so well. Too well. You didn't cry in front of me. You didn't fall apart. You just got quieter. Grief changes shape when you get older. It doesn't scream. It settles. I thought you were shutting down, she continued. When you tripped that day, it terrified me. I kept imagining you alone on the floor with no one knowing. I nodded slowly. That's a fair fear, I said. But instead of talking to you, she whispered, I started planning around you. There it was. Planning around you. Not with me. She looked ashamed. Craig kept saying we needed to think long-term, that we couldn't wait until something serious happened. And I agreed. I thought I was being responsible. Responsible people communicate, I replied calmly. They don't execute. She winced at that word. I know. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't tense anymore. It was reflective. Then she said something that shifted everything. The money wasn't the point. I raised an eyebrow slightly. We didn't need the $1,200, she said quickly. We were going to open a separate account for future medical emergencies for you. Craig thought it would be smart to start small without upsetting you. Without upsetting me. So instead, I said softly, you upset me by lying. Her shoulders sagged. Yes. For the first time, I saw not a manipulative adult daughter, but a scared child who didn't know how to approach aging, loss, or the idea of losing another parent. You know what hurt most? I asked. She looked up. Not that you worried about me. Not even that you sold Charlie. Her breath caught. It was that you believed I wouldn't understand a conversation. She started crying again. I didn't want to admit I was afraid, she said. It was easier to act in control than to admit I felt helpless. There it was. Control is often just fear in a suit. Charlie climbed into her lap, licking her cheek like he remembered her before all this. She laughed through tears. I'm so sorry, Mom. The words were raw this time. Not defensive. Not strategic. I stood slowly and walked over to her. I believe you, I said quietly. She looked shocked. You do. Yes. But believing you doesn't erase what happened. She nodded. I know. And the lawsuit, she asked softly. Are you still going through with it? Yes, I said calmly. Not to destroy you, but to protect my name. I need it documented that I was never declared incompetent. That matters. She took that in. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Do you still trust me? That question sat heavy in the air. Trust isn't automatic once broken. It rebuilds in layers. I trust that you were scared, I said carefully. I don't yet trust your methods. She nodded slowly, accepting that. That's fair. We sat there for a long time. No yelling. No accusations. Just honesty. Finally, she looked at me and said something that softened something deep inside my chest. I don't want your house. I don't want your money. I want my mom. I felt my throat tighten. I'm right here, I said. And for the first time since this entire mess began, I believed we might survive it. But here's the truth about karma. It isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's revelation. Sometimes it forces everyone to see themselves clearly. Craig still hadn't apologized. Craig still believed this was overblown. And something told me the final test wasn't between me and my daughter. It was between me and the man who believed control was strength. Because forgiveness is one thing. Accountability is another. And Craig had not yet faced his. What happened when he finally did? That's where this story truly ends. Craig didn't come to apologize. He came because he had to. 2 weeks after Melissa's visit, the HOA decision came through. They were fined and formally warned. One of the French bulldogs had to be rehomed, or the penalties would escalate monthly. This time, there was no way around it. No cousin to arrange it quietly. No narrative about what's best. No controlling the story. Rules are inconvenient when they apply to you. He showed up on a Saturday afternoon, holding the smaller of the 2 dogs in his arms. The cream-colored one with the pale blue eyes. He didn't look angry this time. He looked tired. Can I sit? He asked. I nodded. Charlie watched carefully from beside my chair. Craig lowered himself onto the couch and rested the dog on his lap. The animal clung to him, confused. They're making us rehome one, he said flatly. I know, I replied calmly. He looked at me, searching for something. Guilt. Satisfaction. Vindication. He didn't find any. I didn't think it would feel like this, he admitted quietly. Like what? I asked. He swallowed. Like I'm failing something that depends on me. The irony settled gently between us. That's how it feels, I said softly. He stared at the floor. I thought I was being strategic, he continued. Planning ahead. Being the responsible one. You were being controlling, I corrected gently. He nodded once. Maybe. Silence stretched, but it wasn't hostile. Then he looked up at me. When you came after us legally, when you reported the HOA, I thought you were trying to hurt us. I wasn't, I said. What were you doing? I was restoring balance. That word seemed to land. Balance. Craig exhaled slowly. When we sold Charlie, he admitted, I didn't think about how it would feel for you. I thought about logistics, liability, long-term planning. That's the difference between management and love, I said quietly. Love asks first. He absorbed that. For a long moment, he just sat there stroking the dog's back. Then he did something I genuinely did not expect. He stood up, walked over, and gently set the French bulldog down in front of Charlie. I'm not here to fight anymore, he said. I'm here to say I was wrong. Not defensive. Not qualified. Just wrong. And sometimes, that's all accountability needs to be. You don't owe me perfection, I said calmly. You owe me respect. He nodded. You have it. We talked for nearly an hour after that. About fear. About aging. About control. About how watching a parent get older feels like standing on unstable ground. I was scared of losing Melissa's stability if something happened to you, he admitted. She leans on you more than she shows. That softens something in me. I am not disappearing, I said firmly. I am aging. There's a difference. He gave a small, tired smile. I see that now. When he left, he was quieter. And later that week, they found a home for one of the French bulldogs. But this time, they did it differently. They met the family together. They asked questions. They allowed themselves to feel the weight of it. No lies. No manipulation. No hidden fees. Just transparency. The lawsuit? It concluded formally. Documentation entered into record confirming no medical incompetence. Case closed. My will remain structured the way I said it. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. Melissa visits more now. Not out of obligation. Out of intention. Craig doesn't call me Eleanor anymore. He calls me Mom. Charlie still sleeps at the foot of my bed. And sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I think about how close we came to losing more than a dog. Here's what I learned. Karma isn't about destroying people. It's about reflecting them back to themselves. They tried to control what they feared. I forced them to face it. And in the end, I didn't have to steal their dogs. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to burn bridges. All I had to do was stand still and refuse to shrink. My own daughter once thought I was fading. Now she knows. I'm still here. And I am not done living.